Fantastic. See, everyone's trickling in now. We are live. Perfect. We'll get it started. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Appreciate you joining our Ecom Weekly live workshop. Today, we're going to be talking mostly on the creative strategy side. The main theme is overcoming the scroll stopping fallacy. So the goal of today's conversation really is about building an effective creative beyond the hook and getting the most leverage possible out of your creative strategy in 2026. So I think one thing that everybody can probably attest to, it seems like there's a different AI workflow agent and or tool that's popping up on a daily basis in the world of creative. So very important to understand not only how you harness those tools, but how you actually get the leverage out of your creative strategy team in kind of the age of AI. So main things we're going to really kind of dive into, the themes of the conversations, bridging the attribution gap. So stop merely sourcing inspiration and start actually driving results by connecting your creative to the actual strategy behind it. Stop resonating with no one. So we're really going to dive into the concept of hooking people's attention. And while that's obviously important, we really want to move beyond that and actually convert. So how do we actually do that? We're going to talk about scaling with substance. So really mastering the frameworks that satisfy the algorithm's hunger. So as everybody knows, platforms like Meta, et cetera, require a large volume of creative. And specifically in the age of AI and all the tools that we have available to us, producing a high volume of creative has never been easier, but sacrificing quality is something that we don't want to do when we're producing a very high volume. So we're going to kind of talk about how to avoid, for lack of a better term, AI slop in that regard. And then we're also going to chat about leveraging the AI intern, meaning where does the AI efficiency end and human creative strategy really begin? So today joining us, Kaity D'Agostino, who is our lead creative strategist at Applo. So works very heavily on the paid media side from a creative strategy standpoint. So she'll be chatting a lot today through these concepts. Myself, one of the founding partners at Applo Group as well. And quick summary about Applo. So we are a direct consumer growth firm. We specialize in the marketing, financial, and software services for direct consumer e-commerce brands. We've worked with over 100 plus consumer brands, typically ranging from 10 to 100 million in annual revenue on the D2C channel and 50 plus technology partnerships. So feel free to check us out after. And the agenda today. So first section, we're talking about the dog whistle strategy. So again, that concept of going beyond the hook, what happens after actually hooking somebody's attention. Secondly, we're going to talk about solving the quality versus quantity paradigm. So really discussing how do we leverage AI to produce a high quality of assets, or high quantity of asset, but also maintain that quality. And then lastly, really, how do you layer in AI to your creative strategy workflows? And again, get the most possible leverage out of your creative team. So with that being said, I will hand it off to Kaity here to kick things off in the dog whistle strategy. And again, appreciate everybody joining us. And you will get a recording of this afterwards as well. So you can always go back and look at things that we discussed. But I'll hand it off to Kaity and we'll get started.
Awesome. On to the fun stuff. So we're going to start by diving into the dog whistle strategy and really just uncover why speaking to everyone is going to convert no one. So I think both brand owners and ad agencies alike are likely intimately familiar with the ongoing pursuit of that scroll stopping moment and the need for a strong 3-second hook in the beginning of your ads. And while that opening hook is vital, it is futile if it's not followed up with consumer specific problem solving information. So what we are seeing more and more of with an increasingly competitive ad landscape and platforms like Meta and Google that are demanding more and more sheer volume of assets being tested is almost a desperate switch of strategy to more shock value scroll stopping moments. And the result of that is this widening gap between impressions on ads and actual conversions. So really the shift here is understanding what the ultimate goal of, and our goal is not to sheerly get impressions, it's to sell your product. So a lot of times these kind of shock value scroll stopping moments are going to be successful in those impressions. They are not successful in converting. So how we solve that is by taking a step back and understanding the ultimate goal here is selling the product. How we're going to do that is reaching our high intent ideal consumers. So what we want that shock value moment to feel like is actually more of that super nuanced dog whistle moment where your intended consumer stops and says, wait, that's a problem I have. Tell me more. That's a product that I've been looking for. Why is this one different? Those are ultimately going to be the high converting moments for you. And the way to achieve that is first by thoroughly and intimately understanding your consumer, understanding your product, and how your product is going to meet the needs or solve the problems of that very specific consumer. So, all in all, a successful ad should not land with everyone. It should not stop everyone in their tracks for a shocking moment. It should feel more like a one-on-one conversation with that high intention consumer. So
Mhm.
once
All
we
right. Yeah.
understand that, yep.
Nope. Go ahead, Katie. Sorry,
Oh,
I'll jump in after you finish. Yeah.
I was going to say, once we understand those product benefits and that rationale and that messaging, then and only then are we going to be able to understand what would be the rationale behind them stopping. And then from there, we can understand how to scale. And we'll get into that in the next
Mhm.
section.
Yeah, and I think you framed it really well, Katie. I think for everyone watching here, a good kind of comparison is on the email marketing side specifically. If you look at open rate versus click rate, open rate is obviously a bit of a vanity metric. At the end of the day, what we want is people to actually click through and engage with the campaign and get to your website and ultimately take action. So same as Katie just went through here. The impression side of things and the hook, while important, the end goal is actually having people take action. So we want to not get kind of distracted by the vanity metrics associated with a lot of creative development here. But we'll jump into modular frameworks, which we're kind of focusing on building a high volume creative engine. So again, I'll pass it off to Katie here as we dive into this.
Awesome. So here we're going to get into really, I feel like what is becoming the great debate in digital ads right now, which is the conversation around quantity versus quality. We have obvious indications from Meta and Google that they are ultimately insatiable when it comes to ad, demanding dozens upon dozens of assets per campaign just for learning purposes. So we do know that there is an obvious need for high quantity when it comes to ads, but it's not necessarily a direction that you should just be throwing spaghetti at the wall and testing anything and everything and hoping that something eventually lands. That is going to be the fastest way to dilute your creative strategy and ultimately your brand impact and the relationship with your consumer. So instead, revisiting what we just talked about in the dog whistle messaging strategies is first we want to start by looking at again, our ideal consumer, understanding exactly what's going to make them tick, exactly what problems we're going to be solving for them, and building messaging strategies around those insights. The messaging strategies are not simply just copy header formats. They will also come in the form of visuals. Certain visuals should also speak to your consumer as a key insight as well, and should serve as some of those kind of scroll stopping moments for them. That dog whistle impact is something that they're looking for. Once we have those elements in play and we understand what our key messaging and our key objectives are with messaging, then and only then are we able to start plugging and playing. So that's where the modular strategy comes in. That is where we're able to start increasing the scale of our outputs by testing out, this is a super strong insight. How many of our product benefits can support that product insight? How many different iterations of this can we make in both visual and copy combinations? So this is where our team is really great at. Once we have a thorough understanding of consumer benefits and product benefits, being able to continually feed that testing need with the combination of these strategic elements. In addition to this, one of the things that we do find leads to more success from our clients specifically is the understanding of creative flexibility when it comes specifically to brand aesthetics. So one of the things that we do find most brands run into an issue with when trying to scale assets is the pursuit of aesthetic perfection when creating iterations of ads. As a creative, it also is, I would say, difficult for us to overcome that instinct too, to want to have exactly perfect weight or kerning on every single font line that you put out. But truly, what we're seeing is going to be the bigger driver is not exactly how your font is laid out, it's what is actually being said in the ad. So if you're able to provide the slightest bit of creative aesthetic flexibility to your team and say, we're willing to test out 10 different formats Two of them are versions that wouldn't have passed the visual pass on an organic post, let's say, but it's worth testing because the messaging is strong enough and proven enough that we want to see what it does in an ad. That flexibility is also going to aid a lot in your teams to be able to feed that kind of insatiable machine in terms of asset scale.
And one thing I'll also add here from Katie's points, just about kind of like going back, I guess, a few slides, but also talking about how we're basically, building the messaging behind creative. Um, the way that a lot of these social platforms target nowadays and serve your ads, of course, over the past years, we've been trending towards the direction of mostly going broad when it comes to targeting, specifically on platforms like Meta. What really does your targeting is creative. And to Katie's point before, if you're basically just focusing on the hook and not really resonating with anybody, that's going to affect your ability to actually target your ideal customer. Because what's happening is Meta is essentially reading your asset before serving it to prospective customers, and then deciding based off of the asset what it's saying, who it's speaking to. We're going to serve it to people that engage with that type of creative and that type of messaging. So that's a very important concept to understand as well about when Meta is actually serving these ads, how it's deciding to do that. And another kind of piece on that is a lot of times people will look at an ad account and see that, when they're testing a bunch of creative, a certain percentage of them are getting very little spend, and they might try and force spend behind those campaigns, which is absolutely doable. But in many cases, that's a feature, not a bug. And that's Meta actually proactively deciding that those assets are not likely going to become high spenders, and your pre-existing assets are likely to outperform. So there's no real sense in allocating a lot of the budget to those creatives. So just some kind of tidbits there when it comes to the actual platforms and how they're serving these ads. And again, to Katie's point that she's mentioned multiple times here, hooking people at the start with something that doesn't actually speak directly to that audience might actually impact your ability to scale more efficiently as well. So we'll move on to the strategic audit side. Katie, I'll pass it off to you to kind of get into how to get leverage out of your creative strategy team and really how to use AI within your organization on the creative side.
Yes, awesome. So I think I would assume that everyone has probably seen an impact to their workflow thanks to AI in the last few years. And I think a large conversation, both on brand and agency side, has been really the role of AI, specifically when it comes to creative strategy. And I can say with confidence that AI should be used as your intern, not your strategist. It is a incredibly helpful tool, especially when it comes to scaling, as we just previously spoke about. But when it comes to understanding those core consumer insights, it is not going to be a replacement for your key strategy. So what we are seeing a lot of impact from AI is, as we just discussed, when you do have those pieces to be able to plug and play with the modular strategy that we just visited in the last slide, we can feed those into AI. There's endless iterations of softwares right now that can just generate new iterations of ads when you feed them those specific messaging insights, and they are able to do that bit of plug and play. But it is not without the need for you to still be auditing things and still be constantly correcting and tweaking on the insights that they are outputting. If you sheerly, and I'm sure many of you have probably run into this before, feed AI your strategic messaging components and ask them to make new iterations again and again and again and again without additional insights and feedback and strategy being input by you, what you eventually start to see is that kind of broken telephone effect and a very, very diluted strategy. And ultimately, the final result that they're spitting out is just that shock value slop that we talked about in the first portion, where it's speaking to everyone and no one, and it has completely lost that kind of emotional connection with your consumer that you and only you should be able to really understand and build on. So AI can be great, especially with some of the automated visual tools that we have now, to continue to build on those iterations and continue to test and feed platforms like Google and Meta, but they cannot solely understand those key insights and build your messaging strategies for you. You need to be able to feed that in and understand the why behind what is making ads compelling, and that why should be what you are building on to create additional insights that AI can start making iterations of.
Mhm. Yeah, and one thing as well on this, like the way that we typically look at producing creative is we kind of have two buckets. We have one which we kind of call pipeline creative, and one that's more conceptual creative. Um, Pipeline creative you can kind of think of as assets that have historical data to support the fact that they'll work. So these are things that we know have driven positive results historically, and we produce a high volume of those. We're still testing within that kind of constraint, but it's sticking very close to what we know has worked historically, and we'll maintain a baseline as we scale. We then kind of have the conceptual side, and really where you get a lot of leverage as a creative team nowadays is really focusing a lot of your effort from an actual human standpoint behind that conceptual bucket. And again, identifying, testing new ways to position the brand, and new creative types and formats to develop that begin resonating, which then essentially get phased into what we call pipeline creative, and that's where you can really get a lot of that kind of pouring gas in the fire, so to speak, with the AI tools to make iterations of top performers. But the leverage really becomes the humans focused on the strategy piece, the creative execution, and kind of organizing that content pipeline. So depending on how your organizations are structured, that ideally is where you have a lot of your team focusing, is that creative strategy and conceptual creative side. I don't know if you'd agree with that, Kaity, or if you have anything to add there, but I think that's one thing that we see a lot of in terms of kind of how we service brands on our end.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that different workflow streams is important to note as well. As Liam said at Aplo, we do have two separate strategies for creative workflow. As he mentioned, that weekly kind of optimization is just building new iterations on proven ads, proven copy, proven visuals. How many times can we make new versions of this that are still going to land?
Mhm.
That is not enough to have an ongoing successful strategy. There's still,
Yeah.
again, that insatiable need to constantly build new things, new testing, and test out unproven messaging, whether it's in the form of copy or visuals. So those new angles are going to come from you understanding this copy line is proven. What is actually the psychological trigger behind what's
Yeah.
making this line of copy successful, and how can we write a new one that's going to hit on that same trigger? So that's really where the strategy will come into your scaling, and that area in particular is where we're seeing AI not be able to compete right now. So they're great for those optimizations, but not so much with those key insights to keep building on.
Mhm. And that's also how you're going to be able to maintain efficiency as you scale, because if you're not actually iterating and finding new winners, and new winners mean like a completely different concept or way of approaching your customer base in the creative side to then ideally provide you with more scalability within your main spending campaigns. If you don't have that piece functioning correctly, that's where you're going to have efficiency difficulties as you push spend even further. So a lot of great points there, Katie, that you went through. So hope everyone has enjoyed the content here. We do have some time for QA, so if anybody has any questions here, feel free to type it in the chat, and we can definitely answer those. So we'll pause for 30 seconds or so here. If anybody would like to put in a question, we can answer those, and then if not, we'll probably wrap things up. I'll give it about 30 seconds here. Okay. Looks like we don't have any coming through here, so we'll probably wrap things up here then in that case. As a benefit for joining, you'll all get an email as well afterwards where you can book a creative strategy session with Katie and myself. So if you want to chat about how not only to develop creative, but also how to get the most leverage out of your current existing creative team, feel free to book a meeting through that link, and we can absolutely give you some insight and our opinion on how you should structure your creative team and how best you can actually kind of operationalize everything that we chatted about today. But appreciate you all joining, and thanks for your time in the middle of the day. And you'll be getting an email follow-up pretty soon with all the material here that we discussed, as well as I think I see there might be a question, actually. We do have a Q&A coming up. Jaden
What
is
is,
asking, what, yep, can you see that as well, Katie? Yeah.
yeah, what is your split between iterations and ideations? Great question. Honestly, I would say because there really is no risk at launching more ads. In fact, I would say there is a necessity to launching more and more. We have a higher output of iterations because it is the easiest format to make new variations of. As I said, once we have those proven concepts, our team and the use of automations from AI are able to produce more of those and test more of those. So ideations will take more time and effort from the team for sure. So I would say it's closer to a 60-40 split right now, with iterations that go out and then new content.
Mhm. And one thing I'll also add there, Jaden, and this is more kind of from a like risk to reward standpoint. So oftentimes that we'll also look at it is, let's say, as an example, you're going into BFCM Q4, a very high volume time of year. You're likely not going to want to be testing a lot of net new ideas and concepts during that really high volume time, because you want to maximize that period of the year and you don't want to take, unnecessary risks during that peak season. So in that case, you might be working a lot more on, the iteration side and producing a high volume of assets that have driven positive results historically to maximize that period of the year. An example of where you might kind of over allocate to the ideation side is, let's say it's just kind of a normal month throughout the year. It's not really a big peak for you, and you're falling below KPI on the new customer acquisition side and efficiency side. That might be a situation where we say, hey, we need to allocate a lot more of our resources to ideations and net new concepts to find something that actually lands right now that allows us to kind of scale further or get back to the efficiency target that we had. So based off of seasonality as well, time of year and how far above or below we are from KPI on the paid acquisition side and efficiency side will kind of dictate how we allocate to ideations and iterations. But to Kaity's point there, on kind of a regular basis, there's more output towards the iteration side, just because the barrier to doing that is much lower. The ideation
Yeah,
side and
we're
concept
able to.
side is where the human component and the actual a lot of the time is actually spent. So hopefully that gives you some more context to Jaden, to kind of the like seasonality, and it depends brand to brand very much on that side. Um, we'll give it another second there, Jaden. If you have another question on that topic, we're more than happy to answer. If anybody else has a question, feel free to type it in. I'll give it about 30 more seconds or so, and then we can wrap things up. Awesome. Okay, looks like that's a wrap. So appreciate everybody's time again, and as mentioned, you'll get an email here with the recording, and also a link to book a creative strategy session with Kaity and myself, if that's of interest as well. So appreciate everybody's time. Have a great rest of your day. Oh, Jaden, I got one there.
Oh.
That was a longer paragraph, right in time. When it comes to iterations, as you know, with it, I'm not updating things. No, it's all good. It's all good. I could probably see you typing really quick on your end there. Things need to be a lot more different when it comes to iterations. How do you go about iterating on winners now, knowing that? Kaity, do you wanna take a stab at that one first?
Sure.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I mean, honestly, the way that the algorithm changes more is like they're rewarding impressions more. But again, as I said, even if the platform is pushing out content that is performing high on impressions, all it's going to serve to you is more impressions and not necessarily conversions. If you have a unicorn asset where you're able to achieve high impressions and high conversions, great, double down, continue iterating on that. If we're seeing certain assets perform really well, just in terms of iterations or just in terms of impressions, sorry, with the new algorithm, what our variations are going to focus on is trying to isolate each of the messaging components that we believe are being effective in that ad. And instead of simply iterating, let's take this piece of copy and work it with 4 different images, or kind of a basic variation, we're going to try to bring those kind of assets into our ideation process and understand what is every element of this that could be incurring those impressions, and how can we start to build new concepts on each of these to really kind of dissect and understand what's working here. So I think really the biggest challenge that the new algorithms are going to present to us is our interpretation of what is success isolated from impressions. So even if something is really being successful on high impressions, is it successful to us in terms of sales? And if
Mhm.
not, how are we going to ideate around it?
Yeah. And the nothing really to add, Katie, from that. But one thing also to mention, Jaden, just like on Andromeda as a whole and meta, like really at its core, Andromeda, what it's essentially saying is that that's basically meta reading your creative before it's serving and then deciding who to serve your ad to based off of, meta reading your creative. And by reading, I mean visually as well as the text. Um, if you think of Meta's intention behind that, their goal is keeping people on the platform. They don't want people to exit outside of like they want them to leave the ecosystem because they make their money by having a large set of users to then have marketers serve ads to. So their incentive is to keep people on the platform. So to our point earlier as well, if we're basically producing creative with hooks and just overall, if you're just using AI as an example as well, it becomes kind of AI slop. You might not have people actually like watching through and actually being heavily engaged with that creative, which is in turn going to also hurt your efficiency and your ability to scale. And Andromeda is obviously going to want to ensure that it's serving ads to people that it feels are going to actually resonate with them, not that's just going to be AI slop that has somebody look at it for a second or two and then leave. So even less in some cases. So I wouldn't also think that like I wouldn't look at Andromeda as this massive change. I think it's been very overblown in the community in the D2C world. People like to point to it as like a culprit for issues and their inability to scale and efficiency problems, but I wouldn't really look at it as a massive change. It's more so just now like creative is really, really doing the targeting. And the biggest lever you have to targeting new audiences is actually how you develop your creative. So to build on that, historically, obviously, you do a lot of audience-based targeting and limit like how you're serving your ad based off of who you're trying to go after. Nowadays, what you do is you actually just develop creative that speaks to those audiences specifically in those personas and demographics. And then Meta is going to ideally serve those creatives to those people that you're speaking to. And again, to Katie's point, if you're not actually having that creative strategy layer in your workflow and actually understanding how can we really speak to the psychological reason behind why this demographic or this persona would actually purchase from us, you're going to have a much less effective time, effective ability at actually targeting them with the creatives that you make. So a bit of a side tangent there, but just wanted to also build off of Katie's point and also Andromeda, Jaden, in your question there. I think we got both of those. Awesome. I think that is it then. Jaden, unless you got another question, I think we're perfect. I think we're good to wrap up. So we'll send you all a recording again and everything via email afterwards. But appreciate you all joining us today and have a great rest of your day and also a great rest of your week. So
Awesome. Great chatting, guys.